I'm Jessica Hartnett, and this is Pam Siski, and this is a part of my project. It's an ESL lesson modification for EDU 580 at Georgetown College. Um, so I'm just going to begin by introducing you to Miss Siski, who has been teaching at Bullitt East High School for 23 years. She currently teaches 9th grade Integrated Algebra 1, and the class we're going to talk about specifically is her co-teaching class, which has a co-teacher in it every day. Has I think 12 students with IEPs and one student who is culturally and linguistically diverse. One interesting fact about our school district, Bullitt County, is that we don't have a very solid ESL program. In a lot of ways, our ESL program consists of sending students to do 30 minutes a day at Rosetta Stone. And so Ms. Siski would like some advice or some help with how to make her student Juan more successful in her class. And this particular student, he came here 2 weeks before the school year started from Venezuela. He lives with his aunt and uncle and his brother. Very, very limited oral proficiency. He's really good at listening and getting a lot better at writing, but he doesn't speak hardly ever, right? Okay, so first I guess I should probably just tell you a little bit, since you don't have a lot of background knowledge about ESL, I should tell you about WIDA. And what WIDA is a set of standards. There are 5 of them, language development standards. The first one is, it says English language learners communicate for social instructional purposes within the school setting. So it's just, this is going to be one we're going to focus on a lot with Juan, because he's not communicating for social purposes or academic purposes, so we want to kind of open those doors. And then there's a standard basically for language arts communication, language of mathematics communication, science, and social studies, so we'll focus on that math as well. Okay, so we're going to focus on communication for social and instructional purposes first with Juan, and why that's important. And it's important for a lot of reasons. A lot of times, I don't know, historically, our school systems have thought, well, we have the student who can't speak English. We need to pull them entirely out of any classroom that speaks English and have them kind of isolated. And research has shown that that's not really the best method for that, because they're not getting what we call authentic experiences with speaking. ESL students need to have a purpose. So one approach to teaching ESL students has been what they call the grammatical approach, which is basically like, if you think back to, I think back to like what my parents would tell me about how they learned like grammar and arithmetic and things. It was all drill. And that's kind of how we would teach students in the grammatical approach. We would drill them on rules and worksheets and things like that. And well, that doesn't really give you real life experiences with it. So that approach isn't very helpful. 2 other approaches are the communicative approach and the cognitive approach. And those 2 are a lot better in that they focus on having the students practice language to communicate, which is why they need it anyways. It's a lot more authentic to them. It has a lot more purpose and meaning, and honestly, it makes teaching it a lot easier. I know one thing you said with Juan was that he has been pulled from several of his classes because his teacher said, well, he just can't keep up. Right. And you specifically asked that he stay in your class, which is wonderful because that's what he needs. Now, granted, it's a math class, and so thinking in numbers is a little different than always thinking with words. But really, what I found, because this is my first kind of go at trying to work with math, is that it's not as different as I thought. So that was good. So part of the reason why we modify for students, ESL students specifically, or CLD is what we call it in class, culturally and linguistically diverse, is because they face a lot of struggles that your typical student may not face. And a lot of times teachers have these students come in their class, and if they can't speak English, they assume, well, they don't know the material. And that's not necessarily the case. A lot of times you have a student who from their home country could be really, really high in, say, math, but you can't see it as well because their language isn't high. And so we definitely don't want to be teaching a kid to add and subtract when he should be doing, exponents and, the quadratic formula or whatever. So that's why it's important that we first recognize that just because there's a deficit in the language doesn't mean there's a deficit in the learning. We modify because, a major factor here is that these students have to do extra processes that not every student has to do. When you hand a math problem, for example, they don't see just the words and instantly have to solve it. They first see the words, then have to translate the words, then have to solve it, then have to translate it back. And so it's just a much longer process for them, and we have to make that as simple as possible. And so you have been so gracious enough to hand me a lesson plan for a lesson that you've done on simplifying expressions that involve exponents. And I had to brush up on some math in order to understand what that meant myself, but I'm there. So I'm just going to walk through with you and show you. You can see in red where I have added certain things just to make them more ESL friendly. So when we start, you have your daily learning target, perfect content target, always need that. I've added a learning objective, and that's really beneficial for ESL students, or a language objective, I'm sorry, because they, in every lesson, even though you're not a language arts teacher, there's language involved, and so you want the student to think, oh, okay, so this is what I'm learning with math, and then this is what I'm going to get with language out of it. And so your language objective is I can explain how to simplify expressions with exponents using mathematical terms and proper verb tenses. So not only can he use the correct English terms, but he can use them in a way that is correct sentence structure, which is going to be a big deal because when you, especially translating from Spanish, you know, sometimes your words are mixed in the order when you translate them to English, and so learning how that tense goes is big. My suggestion for that is going to be using sentence frames to help him kind of learn the order of words. So when I solved for this, the answer was because, that kind of thing. I also added the WIDA standards. Now, there are actually 4 different standards: reading, speaking, listening, and I've forgotten the 5th one all of a sudden. I can't find it in my book. Not that book. Oh, listening, speaking, reading, and writing. There we go. But we're going to only focus on 2 for one in this particular unit because sometimes you don't hit on all of them. We're going to hit reading and speaking. And so for reading, he compared key mathematical terms with their given action using his vocabulary sheet, which we're going to talk about in a minute. And then Juan can discuss the simplification of exponents with a group of his peers. So that's at speaking, talking to people. Now, you've said that Juan is you allowed the class to all kind of use as electronic translators just to get him to open up, and that's been really successful. But you also noted some concern that now he's relying on it all the time. When you try to speak to him, he points or he translates and he doesn't want to speak. So that's a problem that we're going to work on. And then, of course, I'll have your actual math standards, and then we move down to your instructional strategies. I added some things that I would like you to do prior to the lesson, and you were supposed to give this lesson this week, but we've been in a snowpocalypse all week. So before the lesson, it would be really beneficial to provide Juan with a vocabulary sheet, and I can give you a model of what that should look like, but I say that you should probably have the vocabulary term, so such as variable, right? And then a place next to it to translate into his home language. That's a really key part. It's so important to embrace their language that they have coming in and let them know it's okay to have that language. We're not replacing that language. So translate it and then leave an example, a place for him to maybe write examples of it or what that thing looks like. Another thing I would like for you to do is somewhere in your room. Now, this is my classroom. We came in because it's a snow day. But somewhere in your classroom, and could you hear me or the iPad over there? I would like for you to have some kind of a word wall. And we don't think about this too often, but sometimes words that we use, just think about the word add. How many different words can you come up with for add? Like all together, and, both, combined. And we don't think about how that's every time you want to say add and you use a different word, that's a different word they have to translate and know the meaning to. So including something like this in your classroom would be really beneficial so that he can see, different words that mean the same thing, and this is what this looks like. You might also want to pay attention to words that have double meanings, such as product. Product can mean like this is a product that someone made, or like the product in multiplication. And so pay attention to those double meaning words, because those are going to be confusing to him. Okay, moving on. From vocabulary, you say you always start with automaticity, 2 to 5 minutes. Can't really change much about that per school rule, so we'll move on from that. Your bell ringer, you always start with 2 questions from a previous test. I love that idea. I think that's great, a great way to kind of review what they've learned. I would suggest that maybe you start having students who got the question correct come up and explain it on the board. They seem to learn so much more from their peers. And if one, because you demonstrated he's pretty high in math, if it's him, I would ask him the day ahead of time and say, hey, you got number 5 right on the test. This is the problem. This is how you solved it. I'd love for you to explain it tomorrow to the class. Or start small with a group of his peers or something. So he has to speak, but he's got time to prepare it and not feel so overwhelmed, because we don't want him to shut down. Right. But I definitely think that that would be a great way to get him speaking to his peers. Then you review the homework from the night before. Again, I would suggest to add in for some collaboration, because cooperative learning groups is a huge research-based success point for ESL students. And so first, before you review the homework, maybe give them 3 minutes with their group to discuss, hey, I had trouble with this question. Did anyone else have trouble with it? Or, and then that way he can voice. Maybe he's just learning and he's getting some of those listening skills in from his peers, but maybe he'll collaborate. Maybe he'll have it right and he can say, oh, I got it right and I did this, just to get him out of his shell a little more. So you review the homework, and then you give new materials. So for this lesson, you're going to go over the rules of exponents. You wrote that you were going to lecture. I added that you might want to do a teacher-modeled think aloud, where you walk through your steps on the board. Guided notes during this time would really be beneficial for a student like Juan. If you had parts of the notes and you had blanks where he could fill them in and add his own thoughts, that would be good for him to kind of synthesize what he's learning. Your next step is to practice one problem you said independently, and I changed it. And I understand why independently would be good, but I think you'll still get that independent practice when they start doing their homework. Mm-hmm. I would say have them practice one problem that you've written on the board in those collaborative groups, and then review it as a class. So this will be time for them to share and discuss any questions they have with their peers. Because for one, especially, maybe it's internal, he doesn't want to speak out for the whole class. And so if he's in a small group of people, you like ability level groups, and I think that's awesome. So, if he's in a small group of students like that, he'll be more comfortable saying, his concerns. And then you allow time for them to go on and start their homework, which is 10 questions. I would say that maybe just monitor progress in the room, and I would do like a catch and release in the middle of that, halfway through that time. Stop them, ask them if they have any questions. One idea that I came up with, which I haven't read anywhere, but I just thought it was a cool idea. Maybe if you gave out the kids sticky notes or pieces of paper, if they have a question, they can write it down and put it on the corner of their desk, and when you walk around, you could collect those, and then when you go back up to the board, you could go over those questions, and it wouldn't feel like you're calling out a kid, because sometimes they don't want to be that kid, especially one, if he doesn't know how to voice his question. So there's kind of your lesson strategies, your instructional strategies. Materials needed. You didn't have this listed, but I added it. I know that Juan uses some kind of an iPad or electronic device in your class. I don't know if he always has that, but if he doesn't, I don't know about at Bullet East, but here at Bullet Lick, we have classroom sets of iPads or our co-teachers have sets of iPods that can be used. Mm-hmm. So if that's a resource available. One cool site that I found, which really you could use with any of your students, but I thought it was pretty cool. It's IXL.com. Never have you heard of this before? Oh, good. Well, this made me really happy because I found this and I thought it's fantastic, and so I'll show it this way. Can you see it? Yes. You go here and you go to math. Oh, that's language arts. Woo. You go to math, and then down to A1, which is Algebra 1. And then it's got all these different, I just love it. I found it and I thought it was fascinating. And if you go down to one of these, Okay, well, since I know you're talking about exponents. Oh, there we go. Simplify equations with exponents, which is V8. And then it gives him sample problems, and he can put in his question, and then if he doesn't get it right, it goes through how to solve it. I thought that was a really cool app. And since you already said that he uses a translator in class, I'm not going to show you that, but I found like English Launchpad, which was cool. Oh, well, no, I won't go there yet. I'm just excited and ahead of myself. You said that you use a graphic organizer, and you sent me what that looks like. I liked that graphic organizer, and for those of you watching the video, I'll post it with this, but it basically just had on one side the rules of an exponent, what the rule was, and then it showed some example problems, and it was something I guess he could keep in his notebook if he wanted to. I thought that was a great idea. And then your vocabulary sheet, which I've already talked about. Let's see. Oh, one thing that I would like, you wrote in your modification, you said that every night you use your Mind 101 to send out 1 or 2 answers to the homework, and you basically take a picture of how you've solved it.
Yes.
And I thought that was a great idea, but then I saw, I learned about something called the Show Me app, and it's something I plan on using in my own classroom and posting to my class website, because we all have to have them. And so basically the Show Me app, and it looks really empty right now, is like an interactive whiteboard. So you can write on it, and you can record your voice as you walk through a problem, which would show them, rather than just show them a picture, you can model your thinking. And as long as they have access to the internet at home, then they have access to this, which would be a really cool feature that you could do with the homework. Or you could do it with additional problems, even if you needed to, which I liked. So there's the technology. Just some additional notes I thought that would be useful to add. Always make sure to check for background knowledge, because I know that Juan didn't come with any academic records from Venezuela, and so that's really difficult. So, always, and I like math, because math seems to kind of scaffold itself naturally, which is a big deal with ESL learning. But, if you introduce a new topic, it would be great to go to him, hey, have you seen this before? What have you done with this? And he can kind of tell you or show you what he knows. Peer collaboration is always key. Vocabulary, I talked about having the vocabulary bank and the sheet. Another thing that I've learned about in my classes is something called guarded vocabulary. And I had never thought of this before now. Any idea what that is?
No.
So guarded vocabulary is something you do. When you speak to the class, you make sure that you are careful of what you say. So you don't want to use any of those expressions like, don't let the cat out of the bag. Because to an ESL student, that's like saying, there's a cat in the bag, where's the cat at, And so you have to really think about, how do I simplify what I'm saying? Not simplify the content, but simplify my words so that they're not playing catch up on the words and they're really paying attention to the content. So I thought that was pretty cool, something to pay attention to. One component, I guess, of good practice with ESL students is to use hands-on activities. Manipulatives, I know, are huge in math, so those kinds of things. You showed me a strategy where you kind of broke down the exponents and you showed the number of x's. Those manipulatives would be good for that. And then just visuals, up around the room, such as the vocabulary and things like that. I definitely think that those are going to be beneficial. The last thing that I would suggest, and I didn't really have a place to fit it into this lesson, but you said that his writing is progressing. Yes. You've shown me some examples of that, and that's awesome. And I want to continue to progress that and make him reflective. So I don't know, do you use any kind of math journals in your room?
Yes.
Okay, so definitely maybe I like the idea of separating your journal by like skills learned and I don't know, something else and a section to reflect. And so as you bring up a new topic, you can always ask your students to reflect on what they have learned, how well they think they know it, but in sentence form. And even if one only busts out, 2 really good complete sentences, that's going to show you kind of how he's progressed and how it has him reflecting back on his thinking, which I think is important. In our school district, we don't have a lot of advocacy for these students. I definitely disagree with some of our methods that we're using right now. I don't think that pulling a student out of class and adding more Rosetta Stone is helping them stay cognitively where they should be with their peers in other subject areas. And so hopefully you will take some of what you've learned today and go back and advocate to other teachers. I'm a good resource if you need any help. I'm learning. I have a blog, an ESL blog, and I'll give you the information for that, and I'll link it to this video. And any questions or anything that you need to know, you can always ask. Do you have any questions?
Awesome. Actually, the only question that I have is when you were talking about the vocabulary sheet, the preloading vocabulary, you said to put it in their own language, which I think is awesome. Do they put it in the English language as well, a definition, or is that just examples?
I really think that it's up to you, because, well, you could have them do both, or you could just have them do it in their language, because really, that is for their benefit. So as long as they know the English word, and they know the definition in their own language, and they can translate that in their mind, my opinion is it's not necessary to rewrite it again in English, unless they need that practice with writing out sentences. But as you've shown, his vocabulary is his written expression is definitely improving. One other thing that I didn't really talk to you about, and I should have mentioned this in the beginning, when I talked about the WIDA standards, I did not talk about how we assess how students, what level students are at. And I thought about it when I mentioned something about you didn't have any of his scores from his previous school. One thing that drives me absolutely crazy is that they don't access test until January. And you said Juan was just pulled out of your class for access testing last month. But they're not going to give you the scores until April, I think, which is crazy. So at the beginning of the year, they're supposed to do another test to kind of assess where he's at. And we looked at Infinite Campus with you, and they didn't have the score for that, which is frustrating. So it's definitely something we want to talk to maybe your counselors about at your school, why that wasn't in there. But so when you do get his access scores, or if you ever have a student again in the future, you'll know that they're assessed on those same 5 things, the speaking, or 4 things, the speaking, the listening, all that. And it'll tell you kind of where they stand on a 1 to 5 scale, I believe. I've never seen a student over 4. 4 is kind of the point where whether or not they need ESL services or not. And if they do, like Juan, they're put into our program of Rosetta Stone. But so that's definitely something that you should be aware of, is that's the test where they assess where the student is at, not necessarily on subject level, but with just language in general. And they give that test to any student. You know how they send home that survey at the beginning of the year that asks what the home language is?
Yes.
Any student who says that their home language is anything but English, they take that test. Or, in Juan's case, because I do believe his aunt and uncle speak English, any student who comes in and clearly cannot speak English on their own, that test is given as well. So just a fun bit of information for you to kind of understand how it works. So, any other questions?
No, not right now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for helping me with this, and I feel like I just talked your ear off. But I've given you a lot of suggestions and ideas for how you can just make small modifications. I definitely think that adding those language objectives every day will help him understand how he's learning language while he's learning content matter at the same time, even though that's not your subject. You can definitely tell whether or not he's forming a sentence with the right verbs.
Right.
It's not going to take a lot of extra work on your part, but it is going to make him feel like it's got multi-purpose, multifunctionality, I guess, for his learning. So, all right, well, thank you very much, and thank you for watching my